My parents disowned me because I refused to live their way. They treated me like a disappointment and worshipped my brother. Then, my grandfather left me everything. $3 million, the family estate. Now, the same people who abandoned me are desperate and begging. Hey Reddit! My parents always treated my brother like royalty, while I was just the extra kid in the room. I thought leaving home would mean I was finally free, but turns out they weren't done messing with me yet. Before all that, let me back up and start at the beginning. My name's Ethan Carter. I'm the younger son in a family where I never really felt like I fit. I grew up in a big house with well-off parents, Richard and Elaine, and an older brother, Marcus, who seemed like he was born to make them proud. From the outside, we looked like the picture-perfect family. Good neighborhood, the kind of vacations that got turned into Christmas card photos. But on the inside, it was obvious who mattered and who didn't. Marcus was the favorite. He was disciplined and responsible, the type who carried a notebook around to track his homework and loved showing Dad numbers he'd calculated. By the time he was 10, my parents were already saying he'd grow up to be a finance guy like Dad. And they weren't wrong. Marcus leaned into it hard because he knew it kept him on their good side. I was different. I liked sketching, asking questions about buildings, taking apart old toys to see how they worked. I wasn't lazy, but my interest didn't look like money to my parents, so they didn't take me seriously. I got used to hearing, "That's nice, Ethan," whenever I showed them something I drew. Meanwhile, Marcus got cheered on like he'd invented electricity for bringing home a certificate. The one person who never made me feel second best was my grandfather, Henry. He was my dad's father, and he lived about 20 minutes away on a big estate that had been in the family for generations. He'd been an architect before retiring, and you could tell he loved it. His house had this study filled with old blueprints, rolled up like scrolls, and shelves packed with books on design. He was always showing me something new, never talking down to me, never making me feel like my curiosity was a waste of time. Some of my best memories are weekends at his place. We'd start mornings by fishing at the pond out back. I remember being maybe 7 the first time he showed me how to bait a hook. I hesitated, but he guided me through it slowly, like it actually mattered. He always tied lessons into those moments. The most valuable things in life can't be bought, Ethan. Remember that. I didn't get the full weight of it back then, but it stuck in my head anyway. The best part was the study. He'd roll out his old blueprints and tell me stories about the buildings he'd designed. Libraries, community centers, even an office building that half the town still worked in. He explained how lines on a page became walls, doors, entire spaces where people lived their lives. I'd stand there, wide-eyed, feeling like I was being let in on a secret world. He'd always say, "A good architect thinks about the people first. Buildings should serve them, not the other way around." That line never left me. Back home, though, it was the complete opposite vibe. My parents couldn't care less about sketches or blueprints. If Marcus brought home a B in math, my dad would clap him on the back and call him a genius in the making. If I got an A in art, Mom would glance at it for half a second before bringing up Marcus's latest achievement. It wasn't just neglect, it was constant comparison. One moment that's burned into my memory was my 10th birthday. My parents went all out, rented one of those inflatable castles, hired a planner, invited my entire class. It should have been the kind of birthday every kid dreams about. Except when the day came, my mom called to say they were stuck in an important meeting. My dad repeated the same line. They didn't show up. I tried not to let it show in front of my classmates, but standing there watching other kids' parents chat on the sidelines while mine weren't even there, it hurt. Henry noticed right away. He didn't make a big speech or anything. He just stepped into their role, organizing games, making sure everyone got food, even climbing into the inflatable castle with us. By the end of the day, kids were saying how cool my grandfather was. After the party, when everyone had gone home, Henry sat with me on the porch. He told me, "Your parents, they love you in their way, but they get caught up in things they think matter. One day, you'll see the difference between things that look important and things that truly are." At the time, I didn't fully get it, but I knew he was trying to keep me from feeling crushed. Marcus, by the way, showed up to the party for maybe half an hour before running off to some school event. Later, my parents acted like he was a hero for even making the effort. "That's dedication," Dad said. "He's got his priorities straight." I remember sitting there thinking, how can they praise him for doing the bare minimum while ignoring everything Henry had done? As I got older, the favoritism in my family stopped being subtle. When I was little, maybe I could pretend my parents just didn't notice me as much. But by the time I hit middle school, it was impossible to ignore. Marcus didn't make it easier. He'd picked up on the favoritism early and leaned into it. If Dad praised him for being responsible, Marcus would make a show of rolling his eyes at me and saying, Not like Ethan, he just draws all day. He knew exactly how to dig at me. And the worst part was that my parents would laugh instead of shutting it down. By the time Marcus was in high school, he was already doing summer programs related to finance. My parents would brag about how he was learning to invest before most kids even understand money. They treated it like he was preparing to take over the world. Meanwhile, I'd be at the kitchen table sketching buildings I'd seen downtown, trying to copy their lines, figure out why they looked the way they did. If my mom noticed, she'd just shake her head and mutter, "Childish." Mom wasn't much better. If she caught me sketching at the dinner table, she'd sigh and say, "Ethan, that's not going to get you anywhere in life." She'd point at Marcus, who would be scrolling through stock updates on his phone, and add, "Now this. This is what focus looks like." It got to the point where I stopped sharing my work with them at all. Why set myself up to be dismissed? I'd keep my notebooks hidden under my bed, or bring them to Henry's place instead. At least there, someone actually cared. The divide between me and Marcus kept growing. He was confident in every conversation, always talking about money, business, or whatever project Dad had him shadowing at work. I'd try to chime in with something I was interested in, but it always got brushed off. Sometimes Marcus would smirk and say, "You're just not serious, Ethan. That's your problem." And my parents would nod like he'd said something wise. The only time I felt like I belonged anywhere was at Henry's estate. He'd take me fishing, we'd work on little repairs, or just talk in his study. He never once made me feel like I was less because I wasn't like Marcus. In fact, he seemed to appreciate the ways I was different. "Don't let anyone tell you your ideas don't matter," he told me once. "The world needs dreamers who can actually build." That line stuck in my head. At home, I was the dreamer, the one who wasn't practical. With Henry, being a dreamer wasn't an insult. It was a strength. Okay, by the time I turned 18, the tension in the house had reached a point where even small conversations felt like landmines. Marcus was already the pride of the family, interning at a financial firm downtown, shaking hands with people Dad knew, carrying himself like he was already 30. Every time he came home, my parents acted like he was the second coming. Meanwhile, I'd just gotten my acceptance letters. I'd applied to a handful of schools, but the one I cared about most was a university with a strong architecture program. When the acceptance letter arrived, I felt like my chest was going to burst. It wasn't just a win for me. It felt like proof that Henry hadn't wasted his encouragement all these years. I was excited, nervous, proud, until I showed the letter to my parents. I handed it to my mom in the kitchen one evening. She read it quickly, then set it on the counter like it was junk mail. "Architecture?" she said, like the word itself was a disappointment. "Ethan, that's artistic. You need something practical. Finance, economics, maybe business law." Dad came in behind her, picked up the letter, and scanned it. He let out a small laugh. "This is what you're celebrating? You're accepted into drawing class while your brother is already making contacts in the real world?" He tossed the letter back onto the counter. My excitement started draining. "It's not just drawing, Dad. It's a real program. One of the best in the state." Marcus strolled in right then, perfectly timed as always. He grabbed a soda from the fridge and smirked. "Architecture, huh? Guess you'll be designing tree houses while I'm running portfolios." That got a chuckle out of Dad. Mom didn't even try to hide her smile. "Marcus is right, Ethan. You need to think about your future. You can't build a life on sketches." Something in me snapped. I'd stayed quiet for years, but I couldn't anymore. "Do you ever hear yourselves? You've been grooming Marcus since he was 10, acting like he's some prodigy. Meanwhile, you've never once taken me seriously. I got into a competitive program, and you treat it like a joke." Dad's expression hardened. "Don't take that tone with me. We've given you everything. Food, a roof, education. And this is how you repay us? By throwing it all away on some fantasy career?" "It's not a fantasy," I shot back. "This is what I've worked for. This is what I care about. Just because it's not your definition of success doesn't mean it's worthless." Marcus leaned against the counter, grinning like he was watching a comedy show. "Calm down, Ethan. Nobody's saying you can't have hobbies, but architecture isn't a real career unless you're some star. 90% of people in that field end up broke. You should listen to Dad." I turned on him. "Easy for you to say when everything's been handed to you. You don't even know what it's like to have to prove yourself." His smirk dropped for the first time. "Don't make this about me. I've earned every opportunity I've gotten." Henry's face flashed in my mind. His encouragement, the way he'd always told me my ideas mattered. The contrast made me angrier. "Earned? You've been spoon-fed your whole life. Dad brags about you like you built the stock market yourself. You're just doing what they want, and that's why they love you." Mom slammed her hand on the counter. Enough! You will not disrespect your brother. Marcus has discipline. He has vision. He knows how to succeed. She pointed at me, her voice shaking with anger. You waste your time with pencils and notebooks. You're ungrateful, Ethan. Completely ungrateful. The word stung. Ungrateful? For what? For being ignored? For always being told I'm not good enough? For having to hear how perfect Marcus is every single day? Dad stepped closer, his face red. At least your brother understands responsibility. You hide behind your grandfather's nonsense. Henry filled your head with dreams, instead of preparing you for the real world. You're exactly like him, content to scrape by, wasting potential. That was the lowest blow I'd ever heard from him. My voice shook, but I forced the words out. Grandpa Henry has more integrity in his little finger than you've shown your whole life. He actually cares about people. He shows up. He believes in me. That's more than I can say for either of you. The room went dead silent. Marcus muttered, "Wow," under his breath, like I'd crossed some sacred line. Dad's eyes narrowed. He pointed to the door. If that's how you feel, then get out. I won't have someone under my roof who doesn't respect his family. You want to chase this ridiculous dream? Do it on your own. Don't expect another cent from us. Mom's voice was cold. Her arms crossed tight. You've made your choice. Don't come crying back when reality hits. I stood there for a moment, my heart pounding so hard I could barely breathe. I half expected them to soften, to take it back, but their faces were stone. Marcus looked smug, like he'd just watched me lose the final round of some game he'd always been winning. So I walked to my room, grabbed a duffel bag, and stuffed whatever I could fit inside. Clothes, a few notebooks, nothing else. My hands were shaking, but I didn't stop. When I came back downstairs, Dad didn't even look at me. Mom just stared with this mix of anger and disappointment that burned more than if she'd yelled. Marcus smirked and said, "Good luck, little brother. You'll need it." That night, I left home. I found a tiny studio near campus, barely bigger than a closet. The bed was a mattress on the floor, the kitchen was a hot plate and a mini fridge, but it was mine. It was terrifying, but it was also the first time I felt like I was steering my own life. Henry showed up the next day, not with pity, but with quiet support. He dropped off a bag of groceries and an old drafting textbook. Just some extras I had lying around, he said with a wink, pretending it wasn't intentional. I was scared, but for the first time, I felt like maybe I wasn't doomed to live in Marcus's shadow forever. Barkin Sir Aw. About a year after I moved out, Henry connected me with his old colleague, Mr. Alvarez, who ran a modest architecture firm in the city. It barely covered my bus fare, but it gave me real-world experience. Drafting, doing red lines, and sitting quietly in meetings, soaking up everything I could. That's how I ended up juggling 3 things at once. Morning shifts at a coffee shop, afternoon classes in architecture, and nights washing dishes at a restaurant downtown. It was exhausting. I'd wake up at 5 a.m. to catch the bus, spend 4 hours serving impatient commuters their lattes, rush to class still smelling like burnt espresso, then head straight to the restaurant where I'd scrub plates until midnight. By the time I dragged myself home, my body ached and my clothes reeked of grease. I'd collapse onto the mattress on the floor, too tired to even take my shoes off sometimes. The stress showed. I lost weight, dark circles planted themselves under my eyes, and I constantly worried about making rent. But in a weird way, I also felt proud. Every bill I paid came from money I'd earned myself. Every day I survived felt like a small victory. Meanwhile, Marcus was thriving. He'd landed internships at prestigious financial firms before even graduating college. My parents bragged about him nonstop to relatives, friends, anyone who would listen. Marcus is already networking with partners, Dad would say at family dinners. He'll be managing accounts worth millions soon. Mom added, he's so focused. He's not wasting time on childish things. Whenever I showed up at those family gatherings, weddings, holidays, funerals, I was treated like a footnote. If I tried to mention my coursework or projects, the conversation would get redirected within seconds. One time, I brought up a design I was working on for a class project. My uncle nodded politely, then immediately asked Marcus about the stock market. It was like I didn't even exist. Marcus noticed too. He didn't miss a chance to rub it in. At a cousin's wedding, he smirked and asked me, "So, still drawing buildings no one's going to live in?" My parents laughed like it was clever. I wanted to disappear into the floor. The only person who treated me differently was Henry. No matter how tired I was, I still made time to see him once or twice a week. He'd invite me over for dinner at the estate, and it felt like stepping into another world. We'd sit in his study, and I'd show him my sketches or talk through assignments. He listened carefully, asked questions, and gave advice without ever making me feel small. When I told him about how overwhelmed I felt balancing jobs and school, he said, "Struggle isn't weakness, Ethan. It's the forge. You're learning things your brother may never understand, how to stand on your own 2 feet." He made me believe that the grind had meaning beyond just survival. One night, I brought him a project I'd done for a class, a design for a small urban park with shaded seating and a playground. He looked it over for a long time, then tapped the page. "You think about people," he said. "That's rare. Don't lose that." It was the kind of feedback that kept me going through 16-hour days. Marcus, of course, continued climbing the ladder. At the next family holiday, my parents couldn't stop talking about how he'd been offered another internship with a firm that practically guaranteed him a job after graduation. I sat at the same table, eating quietly, while my achievements went unmentioned. Henry, though, pulled me aside before I left that night. "Don't measure yourself against Marcus," he told me. "You're walking a different road, and one day, people will see the value in it." I nodded, even though deep down, I wasn't sure if he was right. But hearing it from him mattered. Those years were some of the hardest of my life. Constant exhaustion, feeling invisible in my own family, scraping by month after month. But they were also the years that shaped me. Every late night, every shift, every ignored achievement, it all pushed me to prove to myself that I could stand on my own, no matter how much my parents or Marcus wanted me to believe otherwise. I still remember the day everything changed. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I was at my internship, hunched over a desk copying notes from a set of blueprints. My phone buzzed, and when I saw the caller ID, Henry's housekeeper, I felt a jolt in my chest. She never called me directly. Her voice was shaky. "Ethan, you need to come to the hospital. It's Mr. Carter. He collapsed this morning." I didn't even pack up my stuff. I grabbed my bag and ran out of the office, barely managing to tell my supervisor that it was an emergency. The cab ride to the hospital felt endless. My mind kept cycling through questions. Collapsed how? Was it a stroke? Did he hit his head? I couldn't shake the image of Henry, strong and steady, suddenly brought down. When I finally walked into his hospital room, the sight knocked the air out of me. Henry was lying in bed, pale, thinner than I'd ever seen him, wires running from his arms to machines that beeped steadily. This was the man who'd always seemed unshakable, the one who built half the town and carried himself like nothing could wear him down. Seeing him like that made my knees weak. The doctor didn't waste time. "Your grandfather has pancreatic cancer," he said. "It's advanced, and it's already spread to his liver. We're estimating months, not years." I felt like the words were bouncing off a wall inside my head. Pancreatic cancer. Months, not years. It didn't seem real. I sat by Henry's bed that night, holding his hand. He looked over at me with tired eyes but managed a small smile. "Don't look so worried, Ethan. I've had a good life." He squeezed my hand, weakly, but still with that familiar steadiness. Better than most. I wanted to tell him he had to fight it, that he wasn't allowed to leave me yet, but the words wouldn't come. All I could do was sit there, nodding, trying to keep my eyes from giving away how terrified I was. From that day on, the hospital became my second home. After classes or work, I went straight there. Some nights, I didn't bother going back to my apartment. I just slept in the chair by his bed, my neck aching in the morning, but not caring as long as I was there. We talked more in those weeks than we had in years. Henry told me stories about his early days as an architect, the mistakes he made, the projects he was most proud of. He spoke about how much joy it brought him to see families moving into a building he designed, knowing it would become the backdrop of their lives. Sometimes he talked about my dad, how Richard had once been curious and kind, before ambition took over. And every now and then, Henry would say something that stuck with me. "I've made arrangements," he told me one night, his eyes half closed. "Things will be handled the way they should." When I pressed him, he'd just smile faintly and change the subject. Marcus showed up a few times, but never for long. He'd stride into the hospital room in one of his tailored suits, scroll through his phone while nodding at the doctor, then leave after less than an hour. "Busy schedule," he'd say, as if that excused everything. Richard and Elaine visited more often, but their focus wasn't Henry. It was the estate. I overheard them one day in the hallway. My dad's voice was low but sharp. "The land must be worth double now with all the new development nearby. We'll need to get an appraisal done." My mom answered in the same hushed tone. "Arthur will know what to do. Marcus is the obvious choice to handle it." I stood there frozen, listening to them talk about my grandfather's estate like he was already gone. My stomach churned. Inside the hospital room, though, Henry never let those conversations seep in. He stayed focused on me. One evening, he motioned for me to lean closer. His voice was weak, but his eyes were steady. You've done well, Ethan. Better than you realize. You've shown more strength in struggle than most people ever show in success. I swallowed hard, fighting the lump in my throat. I don't feel that way, I admitted quietly. You will, he said. Promise me you won't let them break you down. I nodded, gripping his hand. I promise. He smiled faintly, the corners of his mouth twitching like it took effort. Good. Then I can go peacefully. His decline was fast. Within weeks, he couldn't get out of bed without help. His skin turned sallow, his voice barely more than a whisper. I was there early one morning when it happened. The room was dim, sunlight just beginning to edge past the blinds. His breathing slowed, shallower and shallower until finally it stopped. The steady beep of the monitor flatlined, and the nurse stepped in quietly. My hand was still holding his when they switched off the machine. I don't remember much of what came after. Calling people, signing papers. It's all a blur. What stayed with me was the emptiness of that room when he was gone. The funeral was held at the small church Henry had gone to every Sunday for decades. The pews overflowed. Former colleagues, neighbors, families who lived in homes he'd designed. People from every part of his life showed up to pay respects. The pastor spoke about Henry's generosity, about how he never chased money, but still left behind something far greater, a legacy that shaped the town. I sat in the front row, numb, my mind drifting in and out. When I glanced back, I saw Richard and Elaine slip in late. Marcus right behind them, blaming a delayed flight back from Chicago and a driver who took the long way. They'd been there for meetings and flew in that morning, which explained the timing but didn't make them look any more present. After the burial, people gathered in the church hall. I was standing off to the side with a paper cup of coffee when I heard my parents near the refreshments table. Dad's voice was low but sharp. The estate must be worth millions now. The land alone with the development nearby. Mom cut him off. We should meet with Arthur soon. Marcus is the logical choice to handle everything. I stood there gripping my coffee, my jaw tight. My grandfather hadn't even been laid to rest for a full day, and they were already plotting like it was a business deal. Grief and anger tangled inside me until I couldn't tell them apart. I didn't say anything. Not then. But I remembered Henry's words. I've made arrangements. And in that moment, I realized just how important those words were going to be. A week after the funeral, we all met at Arthur Green's office. Arthur had been Henry's attorney for decades. His office looked exactly like you'd imagine an old lawyer's place would. Dark wood paneling, shelves of thick leather-bound books, and certificates framed neatly on the walls. It smelled faintly of coffee and paper, and the whole atmosphere was heavy, like everyone already knew something big was about to happen. Richard and Elaine came in dressed to impress. Dad wore one of his sharp navy suits, and Mom had on pearls and a tailored blazer. Marcus followed behind them, also in a suit, looking smug like he was about to accept a promotion. He shook Arthur's hand like they were old business partners. I sat off to the side, nervous but trying not to show it. Arthur adjusted his glasses and read from the will. I appoint my grandson, Ethan Carter, as personal representative executor of my probate estate. I devise the residue of my probate estate to the trustee of the Henry Carter Revocable Trust to be held, administered, and distributed under that trust. I appoint Ethan Carter as successor trustee of that trust, effective at my death. Richard Carter, Elaine Carter, and Marcus Carter shall not serve in any fiduciary or advisory capacity with respect to my estate or any trust created by me. He looked up. Under the trust instrument, Ethan is the sole current and remainder beneficiary. That's Henry's explicit direction. Arthur slid a preliminary inventory toward me, liquid assets totaling roughly $3 million, and my stomach dropped. The room went silent. I froze, barely processing what I'd just seen. $3 million. Everything? My hands went clammy. My mom's jaw dropped. My dad sat forward sharply, his face reddening. Excuse me? That can't be correct. Arthur looked up calmly. It is correct, Mr. Carter. Your father was very clear in his wishes. Marcus laughed nervously, then tried to recover. Arthur, surely there's some mistake. Grandpa always talked about legacy. He would want someone responsible to manage it. Someone with experience. He gestured at himself like it was obvious. Arthur shook his head. There is no mistake. Henry specifically designated Ethan as the sole heir. He flipped to the next page and continued. Furthermore, he made his reasoning clear. He stated that Ethan has shown resilience, independence, and values that align with his own. He wished for his estate to be carried on by someone who understood the importance of people over profit. My dad slammed his hand on the table. This is outrageous. I'm his son. Marcus is his grandson too. How could he cut us out like this? Arthur didn't flinch. Mr. Carter? Henry was of sound mind when he prepared this will. It was reviewed by multiple witnesses and a physician who confirmed his capacity. He knew exactly what he was doing. My mom leaned forward, her voice sugar-coated but trembling. Arthur, dear, you know how sentimental Henry could be. This must have been a rash decision, influenced by emotions. Surely Ethan can't be expected to manage millions of dollars and a large estate on his own. As she turned toward me with a fake smile. Sweetheart, don't worry. We'll help you handle everything until you're ready. Marcus jumped in, his tone sharp. Yeah, Ethan, be realistic. This is too much responsibility for you. You wouldn't even know what to do with an estate that size. It makes more sense for me to take the lead. I've been training for this my whole life. I clenched my fists under the table, but forced my voice to stay calm. I don't need you to manage anything for me. Grandpa trusted me with this, and I'm going to honor that. Marcus scoffed. Honor it? You don't have the skills or the discipline. You're going to waste everything he built. You'll run it into the ground within a year. Arthur raised a hand. Enough. Henry anticipated disputes, which is why he disinherited Richard, Elaine, and Marcus, and barred them from any fiduciary role over the estate or trust. Capacity was documented by 2 witnesses and a physician, and we hold a video attestation to that effect. The color drained from Marcus's face. My mom gasped. Dad's hands shook with anger. This is slander, Dad snapped. Henry must have been manipulated. He would never... Arthur interrupted, his voice firm. He was not manipulated. He left behind video testimony explaining his decisions in detail. If you contest this will, that video will be presented in court, along with medical evaluations confirming his full mental capacity. I strongly advise against pursuing a challenge. The room went dead quiet. My mom's tone switched again, desperation creeping in. Ethan, think about what you're doing. We're your parents. Marcus is your brother. We should be in this together. I finally met her eyes. Where was this togetherness when I got into college and you told me I was wasting my life? Where was it when you compared me to Marcus every single day? Grandpa believed in me when you didn't. That's why he left this to me, and I'm not handing it over. Marcus stood up, furious. You ungrateful little... Arthur cut him off sharply. Sit down, Mr. Carter. This meeting is over. For a moment, it looked like Marcus might actually lunge across the table at me, but Dad put a hand on his arm and pulled him back. Not out of kindness, just because he knew it wouldn't help their case. They gathered their things in icy silence. My mom gave me one last pleading look as she headed for the door. We're still your family, Ethan. Don't make this mistake. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. When the door shut behind them, Arthur handed me a sealed envelope. Henry wanted you to have this after the reading, he said. It contains personal notes and instructions regarding the estate. He was very thorough. I held the envelope in my hands, still numb from everything that had just happened. $3 million. The entire estate. And the knowledge that, for the first time in my life, I wasn't in Marcus's shadow anymore. But the look on their faces told me one thing for sure. This wasn't over. Their moving into Henry's estate didn't feel like wealth. It felt like stepping into his life. The first week I walked the halls quietly, touching the banisters he'd fixed, opening drawers of old drafting pencils, and sitting in the study chair where he once unrolled blueprints. It wasn't just a house. It was his world in wood and stone. While cleaning the study, I found a locked drawer with folders of sketches and notes. On one, in Henry's handwriting, Community Center, Draft Vision. Inside was a complete design. Gym, library, classrooms, gardens, with margin notes about creating a place where everyone belongs. I realized this was the arrangement he'd hinted at in the hospital. Letting that dream die felt wrong. With Henry's advisor, Claire Donovan, we built a plan. I used only a portion of the inheritance for seed funding, kept the trust invested to handle taxes and upkeep, and filled the rest through matching grants and municipal funds. We phased construction carefully, and also launched the Henry Carter Scholarship with a small gift I seeded and later grew with donations. Around the same time, I left my firm and started a small design studio of my own. Since I wasn't licensed yet, I partnered with Maya Chen, AIA, as architect of record while I finished my hours and exams. Rachel, my girlfriend, was with me through it all. She taught school, steady and patient, and never tied my worth to money. Where my parents measured Marcus in titles and salaries, she measured me in how alive I looked when I talked about a project. It was a kind of love I hadn't grown up with. Quiet, steady, real. At the same time, I started seeing Dr. Patel, a therapist Arthur recommended. It felt awkward at first, unloading years of resentment, but it helped. She didn't hand me magic answers. She helped me sort through the anger, the guilt of inheriting so much, the fear of ruining it. I learned boundaries weren't cruelty, they were survival. 2 years went by. I passed my last ARE and got licensed, so we no longer needed an architect of record. By then, the community center was complete. On opening day, kids tore across the gym floor, families filled the library, volunteers set up classrooms. I stood in the sunlight pouring through windows Henry had once drawn on paper and thought, this is it. This is what he wanted. But peace didn't mean my family disappeared. One evening, I got a knock at the estate's front door. When I opened it, Richard, Elaine, and Marcus were standing there. They looked different, tired, worn down. Later, I found out they'd made a series of bad investments, and Marcus's firm had taken a heavy loss. Dad cleared his throat, his voice lacking the booming confidence I was used to. Ethan, we've had some setbacks. Things didn't go the way we expected. We thought maybe, as family, you could help us get back on our feet. Mom chimed in quickly. We don't need much. Just a loan to tide us over. You have the resources. We're still your parents. Marcus stood there silent, his jaw clenched, clearly hating the position he was in. For a second, I almost felt sorry for them. Then I remembered the hospital whispers, the smug looks at the will reading, the years of being dismissed. More importantly, I remembered Henry's words. Promise me you won't let them break you down. I can't do that, I said firmly. Not because I don't have the money, but because it won't solve anything. You've lived chasing wealth your whole lives. Helping you keep doing that won't actually help you. I need boundaries, and you need to face your own choices. My mom's eyes welled up. Dad's face hardened. Marcus looked away. I didn't slam the door on them. I wished them well. But I didn't give them what they wanted. They left without another word. It was painful, but it was also the first time I truly felt free of their grip. Now, years later, the estate doesn't feel like a burden. It feels like home. My studio has grown to a small team. The Henry Carter Scholarship has already helped dozens of students pursue architecture without the financial strain I went through. And Rachel and I have built a life together that feels steady and honest. Sometimes in the evenings, I sit by the pond where Henry once taught me how to bait a hook. The reflection of the trees ripples in the water, and I think about how far I've come. The inheritance wasn't really the house or the money. It was Henry's lessons. Integrity, purpose, the belief that what you build should matter to people. That's the legacy I carry. Not Marcus's race for wealth. Not my parents' obsession with status. Henry's way of living, with character and meaning. That's what I'll pass on. YouTube just dropped this new hype feature. If you're hooked on this story, smash that hype button. It tells YouTube this video deserves to blow up, and it keeps even crazier stories coming your way.